Mike Griffith here of Dog Nation, along with Chip Towers. We both cover Georgia football, of course. Chip, today the first day of the SEC football media days over there at the College Football Hall of Fame. Greg Sankey, of course, the commissioner since 2015. He kicked it off. What jumped out at you from what Commissioner Sankey had to say today?
Well, I think the most interesting thing was him just, profusely praising the city of Atlanta and how great it was to be in Atlanta and how happy they were to be in Atlanta. And then, right after that, it's like, well, how long are you going to be in Atlanta? Well, we're leaving next year, and we might not be back for a long time. My word is they may go to Houston, they may go to Nashville. At the very least, we know they're going back to Hoover and Birmingham, Alabama next year. So, that was interesting. And then there was, right in the middle of there was some discussion about an activity report. There's something along the lines of the NFL's injury report. This would be in response to a lot of the legalized gambling legislation that's going on, and what they're trying to do is kind of get their arms around the controlling information and not having other entities stepping in there trying to find out who's going to be injured on Saturday and things like that.
College, of course, they have some laws that protect these athletes' injury status. Also, as Chip said,
FERPA and HIPAA.
But also sometimes players don't play because of things that happen in the classroom or discipline. So it's more of a participation report.
That's right.
Than maybe an injury report.
Yeah, availability report, I think is what they called it. And yeah, so it's but as the gambling influence increases in college football, more people are going to want to know if D'Angelo Gibbs is going to be eligible for that first game, or Natrez Patrick, or what have you. And so they're trying to be proactive on controlling that information.
And a lot of people say, well, what's the difference? It's just like the NFL. But the reality of the situation is, as Greg Sankey pointed out at the SEC spring meetings, Chip, these college athletes go to class, they have friends, there's student trainers, student manager. He calls them touch points. There's more touch points for people that are going to try and get this information than maybe an NFL athlete who pretty much goes from his $1 million home and his Jaguar to practice and back.
That's right.
And doesn't have the everyday people that are in contact, the high school friends, the parents, the aunts, the uncles, that are all asking these suspicious questions. So though Sankey said he wasn't sure that there would actually be a participation report in 2018, there have been some discussions, and they do realize that there will probably be a need for this. Now, after Greg Sankey spoke, Jimbo Fisher, of all people, kicked it off. And Chip, I wrote a story. He's the new coach, but there's really nothing new about Jimbo Fisher. For those that know Jimbo's background, he started out at Auburn in 1993 as Terry Baum's quarterbacks coach. The Tigers went 11-0 and undefeated. And then Nick Saban hired him in 2000, and he won a national championship with Saban at LSU in 2003. So 13 years in the SEC as an assistant, 11 years at Florida State. Chip, I got to ask you, how successful do you think Jimbo Fisher is going to be at Texas A&M?
I believe he's got a chance to be very successful at Texas A&M, because really, even though he's got that certainly a record of success at Florida State, he's an SEC coach. And Florida State's an SEC school. I don't care what they say. I know they're in the ACC. They always should have been in the SEC anyway. But no, I think he has a chance to come out there and bring all the principles and all the things that he has learned under Nick Saban and Auburn over the years, and apply them to that Texas model. And there's a lot of talent out there in Texas. It's just a matter of somebody being able to get in there and keep those people at home and teach them how to play SEC tough. That's been the whole thing. I think I heard Booger McFarland talk this week. He said the problem with Texas A&M is not the players or the talent. He says being Charmin soft. And I think Jimbo Fisher is a guy that can get, I don't know what the opposite of that is, a sandpaper tough, in the SEC, and bring that to Texas A&M. I think he can do it.
Yeah, one of the reasons why Texas A&M plays that way, they've been one of these fast-paced offenses playing 90 snaps a game. That's great for your offense, but your defense is on the field a lot when that happens too, and they get worn out. One other thing about Texas A&M that Florida State doesn't have is these unbelievable facilities. You want to talk about a great stadium. 112,000. It looks brand new, and Jimbo Fisher got an eyeful of that. As Chip said, he might as well be in the SEC. He pointed out today, you look at Tallahassee, they're surrounded by Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Auburn. So he's been recruiting against these schools, and Jimbo said today he felt like that the SEC has raised the level of play up in the ACC because they've had to compete on the recruiting trail. Chip, you know a lot more about Clemson than I do. What would you say about Clemson now that Jimbo Fisher has left Florida State? Is it all Clemson, or is there a chance Florida State can still compete in that league?
Well, it's going to take a little while to tell that, but I mean, you know, Clemson hasn't been what Clemson is now for a long time. So, I mean, I think it's a wild, wild west over there. And don't forget about our old friend Mark Richt down there in Miami. I mean, there's a guy who's sitting down there in South Florida, and that guy was recruiting for Georgia gangbusters down in South Florida. Now that he's back at home, I think both Florida and Florida State are finding themselves in a pretty tough battle for the best talent in the south part of the state. So I think it's wild, wild west. And then you got Florida and Mullen coming back, and you've got Alabama and Auburn recruiting that part of Florida. That's a tough job right now.
Now we talk about Jimbo Fisher, one of his former assistants. Mark Stoops, Kentucky, talked today. And you wouldn't think that Kentucky would have a lot to say about football, at least. And yet you heard from a Kentucky player, kind of threw it out there, Chip. I mean, if you're looking for some bulletin board material, one Kentucky player delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. The kid, I'm sorry, I forget his name.
Benny Snell?
Yeah, thank you. Benny Snell.
Exactly. Listen to this. He forgets his name, but this is
who I wrote about. No. I mean, you know, I just kind of wandered over there to hear what he's talking about, and within a few minutes, he said, "Yes, I am the best back in the SEC."
See, now you got to remember his name.
Yeah.
He's the best
How
back.
How could I forget Benny Snell?
I don't know why we wouldn't think Kentucky had the best back in the SEC.
But he is. I mean, all kidding aside, I love the kid's confidence. And you know, Georgia last year, he had 94 yards against one of the top defenses in the SEC, and most of that was in the first half. He came out and scored a touchdown. It was, people forget about this, Georgia won that game 42-13. It's 21-13 to start the third quarter, and he just scored a touchdown. They drove straight down the field. You know, Georgia shut him down after that, and they actually ran the ball down Kentucky's throat. That's the problem for Kentucky. It's not on the offensive side of the ball, it's on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Mark Stoops will get around to that. But Benny Snell, very confident guy, 5'11", 223, got the Nick Chubb kind of NFL prototype kind of running back body, and I think he's the real deal. I really do. But they're like a lot of other teams, or like maybe half the SEC, where they don't know who their quarterback's going to be, and that's you know, last time I checked, it's an important part of the football equation. But that'll be a tough trip for Georgia, November 3rd, going to Lexington. It always is. It falls after the Georgia-Florida game. You're not even thinking about it. It's cold. You're showing up, and you know it's the world, the Super Bowl to them, and you're just trying to get by it and get to that next week.
Of course, he was asked about Florida, whether they lost 33 in a row to Florida. But here's one for you. You know, in the SEC, some teams have other teams' number. How about this stat? I didn't recognize this. Kentucky has beaten South Carolina 4 years in a row, Chip.
4 years in a row, and actually that's going to be a big part of the SEC East this year. Is you know, who's going to be battling for those second or third spots. Last year, Kentucky knocked off South Carolina for the fourth time in a row, and they feel like they got their number.
That's right. Dan Mullen, now coming over from Mississippi State, he told Chip and I last week at the Bruce Arians Golf Tournament, maybe the balance of power is shifting. Today, talked with Ed Orgeron a little bit, and although you can't always understand everything he says.
I was going to say, we did hear him. Did we know what he said?
Well, I'll tell you what he did say. He said that Tiger Stadium was going to be alive for Georgia that night. So they have not released the kickoff time, but I think Ed Orgeron has decided that's going to be a night game, Chip. You've been to Baton Rouge. We've both been there under the lights. Your thoughts about that stadium? Everybody says they got a tough stadium. I got to admit, I think there is a little mystique there.
Well, it has a little bit to do with the team that's in there and the players that are in there on any given year, because I've seen it at both ends of it. Georgia's had some success at Baton Rouge, and they've had some great failures in Baton Rouge. And right now, at this very moment in time, I might call Auburn's Jordan-Hare Stadium is one of the toughest to play in on a night game on a Saturday night. But yeah, LSU is always LSU. Here's what I think is really interesting about the whole Georgia-LSU. So last year, you know, Georgia obviously has a Notre Dame game. They have several other road games to get excited about. There's not as many on the schedule this year, but that one is. You know, Georgia plays at LSU, what is it, October 21st, I think it is, something like that. But thank you, 13. He's the details guy. Yeah. So they play at LSU. But the interesting thing is there's not that many tickets out there. Now, you know, you could say that about Notre Dame a little bit, and Georgia fans managed to find their way around that. But I don't think there's going to be less than 8,000, probably as few as 6,000 tickets that LSU is making available for that game. And so that's a really tough ticket for Georgia fans, who I know I've already heard from by the thousands are planning on descending on New Orleans first and then Baton Rouge for that game. They're getting out there as early as Wednesday or Thursday that week, we'll be out there to cover it as well.
I was going to say, Dog Nation's going to be all over that. Chip's going to be in New Orleans. I'm going to be in Baton Rouge. I'm going to visit with Mike the Tiger. I'm going to save my Mike.
You got the real story.
I'm going to save my Mike the Tiger story for later that week. I've got a tremendous memory, Mike the Tiger. Chip, tomorrow morning, Georgia's going to go Kirby Smart. I want to wrap this up. I appreciate y'all watching. Hopefully you'll enjoy these. Chip and I plan on doing a lot of these. What are some things that Kirby Smart could be expected to be asked tomorrow morning?
Have you ever heard of a guy named Demetrius Robertson? I think D-Rob's name will come up within the first 30 seconds to a minute of the conversation. What's really going to be interesting, all kidding aside, is how he answers that, because at this very moment, as we stand here on the corner in downtown Atlanta, you know, all Georgia can say is validate that they are recruiting Demetrius Robertson. They can't get into any details. If he's able to get any more details than that, it means Georgia's made significant progress on the eligibility equation, which there's a whole lot to figure out with Demetrius Robertson.
Well, he's filing for, like, as I understand it, he's filing for hardship to be able to play right away, and that's the question. Obviously, it'd be a significant lift in the receiving corps. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Things didn't work out at Cal, but they've got to wait until he's signed, and then I suppose he'll file the waiver. So that's one question. What else is Kirby going to be asked about?
Oh, well, there's a lot of other things. You know, there's eligibility questions. You know, you're always going to get the, you know, what's up with D'Angelo Gibbs? What's up with Natrez Patrick? Are they going to be able to play early on or at all? We know they're back on the team. We just don't know what their eligibility status is with regard to discipline. You know, the other questions will be about Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. Most of those won't be coming from the core beat guys, you know, but certainly outside of Georgia, everybody wants to know what this competition is between the two quarterbacks. There's a huge, and I think this is a legitimate question, I think there's a huge leadership deficit coming into this season, because, you know, say what you will about Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, and yes, there's a DeAndre Swift and a Zamir White, but all that, Roquan Smith goes, and there's not going to be another Roquan Smith, but it's the leadership capability of all those, the leadership dynamo factor that those guys brought to the table. Not just that they play well on the field, but also how they lead in the locker room and in the weight room. And I think that's unknown. If you look at Georgia's, you know, key players, you know, DeAndre Swift, the sophomore, Jake Fromm, the sophomore. A lot of these guys are stepping in. I don't doubt that Georgia has recruited and has the talent base to where they have players that are just as good or maybe even better stepping in those positions. But can they lead the way those guys? That was a real perfect storm sort of that happened last year. So the question is, can they create that storm with the guys they got now?
Yeah, it usually takes a little adversity for these guys to go, and all you got to do is go back and watch the Rose Bowl replay. And I'll tell you what, Roquan Smith, the way he stepped up in the second half, he made some plays and that he wasn't making in the first half. And that's where that leadership comes in. Chip's right, there's a huge vacuum. I don't even know if Kirby could answer that question, even if he wanted to. You can bet he's going to be asked about the Alabama National Championship game today. I was a little surprised, Chip. Still all the talk about Alabama being the standard. I didn't hear Georgia getting a lot of love today on day one.
No, and I don't know if you know, Georgia fans know this night yet about Mike Griffith. And this came before Mike Griffith joined the Dog Nation team. He's a big believer in that Georgia was the best team in the SEC last year.
Well, they're the champs, right? I mean, they are the SEC champions.
And
right?
nationally, and he just thinks Alabama gets a little bit too love in that regard. Too much love in that regard. And when you look at a lot of the head-to-head battles that have been going on, not just this year, but the last 2 years between Georgia and Alabama, Georgia has been winning a lot of them. You know, it's still got to happen on the field. Alabama won that game, and you got to tip your cap for it. But yeah, Georgia is the defending SEC champions, and he's not, for one, convinced that they're getting the appreciation they deserve.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know this. If I had a choice between having to fly 4.5 hours in Los Angeles and playing Oklahoma, or going down to New Orleans on a 30-minute airplane flight to play a watered-down Clemson team, I think I'd take Clemson every time. And if you don't think that made a difference in the title game, I mean, I got something for you. I mean, there's a lot of stats that back up numbers when teams travel west and have that shorter week of preparation. But it is what it is. Last year is last year. Georgia's going to have to prove they're the best team in college football again and do it in the playoff. That's the difference, Chip. There was a time when Alabama wouldn't have been playing for the national championship, and quite frankly, I can't even believe Georgia was a number 3 seed. I would have thought for sure they would have been one of the top 2 seeds, but in the old system, neither one of these SEC teams would have been playing for a national title. It'd have been Clemson and Oklahoma, so we've come a long way. It's not perfect. We'll have all year to talk about this. This is great conjecture. Really appreciate y'all joining us. Chip and I are going to be covering this every day. We'll do a stand-up every day from here, and we'll deliver more on Dog Nation tomorrow. Brandon Adams, he will have audio of Ed Orgeron. I challenge you to try and interpret what Orgeron is saying. You will hear Tiger Stadium, Alive, Georgia, and Kirby Smart, but if you can make out anything else, you've done a pretty good job. For Chip Towers, this is Mike Griffith. Everybody have a great night.